What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Eastern Current. Thanks for tuning in. Excited about this episode. Talking with a good buddy from Savannah about a lot of light tackle and fly fishing. I'm going to start doing a lot more fly fishing episodes. It doesn't appeal to the masses as much, but it's definitely my passion, and I get a lot of questions about fly fishing through Eastern Current and through just my own guiding business. And as time progresses, fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, more people are getting into fly fishing, and it's an incredible sport. It's a lot of fun. It tests your skills as an angler, and it's a great way to enjoy some time out on the water. And your focus, we were talking pre-show about this, but your focus kind of shifts a little bit as a fly angler. Hopefully, it's going to shift a little bit from maybe filling the cooler up to conservation minded, and you're enjoying the whole experience more than just like putting the fish in the cooler, getting the fish to the boat. At least that's the overall mindset that you see from more fly anglers, which I hope to see progress into more just anglers in general. But before we introduce our secret special guest, I'm going to just go over the pre-show stuff real quick. So if you do love this podcast, it's just an incredible help, blessing financially if you can support us through Patreon. And that's just a $5 a month or a $10 a month donation. I'll link the Patreon page in the show notes, and as well as on the podcast or the YouTube channel show notes. And so no pressure at all if you can't do that. Please keep watching the podcast, listening to the podcast and watching the YouTube videos. We appreciate all that. But if you feel led to help, that's awesome. The other thing is our Facebook group, Eastern Current Fishing. It's a little group for all the listeners to kind of communicate and hopefully connect with some other anglers that they can get out on the water with. So that's all I got to say, and let's jump in. And here is Captain Chad. What's going on, man?
How you doing, bud?
Doing good. I'm enjoying looking at all those sexy looking fly rods behind you. I see a Siegler reel up there. I did a podcast with them last week. I haven't launched it yet.
Yeah,
some cool dudes, man. Super cool dudes.
Very, very cool dudes. Yeah, managing a fly shop helps my addiction.
Yeah, for sure. Or hurts it. It's like being like a crack dealer and being addicted to crack. It's like it'd be hard to not keep taking for yourself. That was maybe
hard
a bad
not
analogy.
To get high on your own supply.
Exactly. Yeah. How often do you leave the fly shop, you think, with new gear?
It's not as often as you think. I've been in the outdoor industry since I was 15.
Yeah.
Started working at outdoor shops and been a gear junkie for a long time. But there gets a point where you kind of have seen it all, and there's a few new things that come out every year that really will grab your attention. But the Siegler reels being one of them.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it's hard to have some restraint sometimes.
Yeah. So let's hear your kind of backstory as far as how you got into fishing, where it's taken you, and how you arrived at where you are today.
Cool. Yeah. So I grew up here in Savannah. Lived here until my late teens. Moved down to Florida for school for a little bit. Moved back up to Savannah and here until I was about 23. And then I moved out west. Worked for a climbing shop in Washington State. I grew up fishing, but never had fly fish. And once I moved to Washington State, I bought my first fly rod, which is a 1942 Orvis bamboo rod off of some guy for $40. And
Nice.
That's kind of caught my first little lake brook trout up in Alpine Lake up in Washington, and went to Montana that next summer to go fish the Yellowstone for the first time and fell in love. And that fall decided to move there and got a job at a coffee shop and spent all winter saving up and getting better at fishing, and started guiding that next summer for 2 years in Glacier, and then spent 4 years guiding in Missoula, where I met you in my last summer in Missoula. And
Yep.
decided Rivers and Glen had just opened up down in Savannah, and wanted to try to just learn my own fishery again from a different aspect, and moved down to Missoula or back to Savannah in 2016. Started running Rivers and Glen, and then used that time to kind of relearn the fishery, and started guiding, launched Tall Tides this time last year.
Nice. Heck yeah. That we were talking before we started recording here about our meeting in Missoula. It's pretty funny. Like, it just shows how small of a world the fishing world is. Me and Chad always bump into each other like the most, or like our connections are just so random. We're like, always know like this minute little person or a connection. So I ended up living in this sick little garage apartment that Chad lived in for a while after he left Missoula. Was when I started my time in Missoula. But it was I miss that place, man. I wish I was about to move there full time and I met my wife. So I blame it on her that I'm not there now.
Yeah, we could blame a lot of women on things we do fishing wise.
Right. Exactly. But that I always tell people, and I feel like it's a lot like Savannah too, like we were talking about earlier, but I also say Wilmington. Like when I have clients here and they ask about my travels and my fishing and whatnot, and I bring up Missoula, I always say it's kind of like Wilmington in Montana. Like the people, as far as the people, they're the same. They're both, outdoor. They want to spend time outside, but they're, there's really cool little small bars and everything's kind of wrapped and focused around in the outdoors, and the mindset and the personality of the people and like the friendliness of the people is the same as Wilmington, I believe. And you were saying the same thing about Savannah. It's kind of they're similar towns.
That's why I fell in love with Missoula the first time I went there. Is walking around town. It was the first time I'd been somewhere outside of Savannah where walking on the streets, people, made a point to wave at you and say hey, and kind of the generosity, but the old town feel. I mean, Missoula is a really old town. Yeah. Savannah's the oldest city in Georgia. And yeah, like, here people live to be on the water, and same thing for Missoula, live to be outside.
Yeah, they definitely do. And I always hear the same thing too about Wilmington and Savannah. People are like, oh, Savannah's just like, it's like another Wilmington, a bigger Wilmington. So, maybe those are the 3 top towns in the country that are just unknown,
Yeah.
People are going to get mad if I share that too much, that's where you want to live.
Exactly.
But I asked Chad before we started recording. I was like, "What are some of the things that you want to touch on in this podcast?" Because I've had a lot of interest in the Georgia fishery. I love fishing in Georgia, and as this podcast grows, I really want to focus on Georgia up to Virginia. Those are kind of our states that don't have as much exposure as far as content like this, where you can learn from. So, and Chad, just like myself, is a big advocate for conservation and was talking about, like, if I'm going to say anything on this podcast, I want to talk about how, we need to be more conservation minded here in Georgia. So I wanted to give you the time to jump into that and kind of talk about what you see there in Georgia and kind of what you want to see.
Yeah. So, first off, growing up here, I grew up fishing bait and tackle like just about everybody else. Didn't really pay attention to the fishery, know much about it. My stepdad's from here, and he raised me fishing here, and we kept fishing, ate them all the time, and never was an issue. And then once I moved out to Montana and started fishing there, and just kind of the mindset of the angler in Montana is that of 100% catch and release. There's just no question about it. As far as picking up on the river, you're damned if you get caught littering in Montana or right. doing anything bad to the river. I mean, the river rules everything. And, coming back home and kind of realizing that mentality didn't quite exist here. And not that people don't respect the river, but we don't necessarily always respect the fish and understand that, sometimes filling the freezer isn't the most important thing to do. We have a pretty high creel limit for trout and redfish. I focus more on the redfish just because the trout fishery is very, very strong here. And, I've been fortunate that I'm friends with a few DNR biologists and officers that I've been able to have some pretty extensive conversations about the fishery. And I'm also the head of the management committee for the state of Georgia for CCA.
I see.
One thing we're trying to push for right now, which I think will get a lot of people on board, because from talking to the biologists, what they've discovered is that when they do the numbers every year on redfish, they don't necessarily see that they're growing or declining as much as they're just been kind of even keel for a while. And, in all reality, that's not the greatest or the worst thing, but it's not heading in the greatest direction. Some people will argue that and whatnot, but, I asked a couple of the biologists and the scientists and some of the DNR officers, like, what would be a good tactic to attack? Because as soon as you just start mentioning lowering the creel limit, all the people that don't want change are the ones that come out. Those are the people that have the loudest voice, are the ones that never want to have any change happen. And when it comes to these town hall meetings that DNR and the state have, those are the people that show up. All the people that want to see change are usually kind of the hardest to get hold of when the time matters. So one thing that we're going to try to push for and that I'm trying to push for right now is putting a guide limit in place, because right now, if I'm guiding 2 anglers in Georgia, we can keep 15 redfish on a charter. They can keep my redfish as well. And one of the reasons I want to target that is because of a few different reasons, but the recreational angler should not be opposed to that, because if anything, that's keeping the guide that they're competing fishing with from keeping more fish.
Right.
The guide should not be opposed, because that's less pressure on him to catch more fish for his anglers to be able to bring home that day. And then the client really doesn't have a say, because most of the time the client is not from Georgia, or they're out of state, or not from the coast. So it shouldn't, their vote, they really wouldn't have a vote most of the time anyways. But that way it's a way for us to kind of get a foot in the door as far as conservation and kind of limiting the amount of redfish that can be harvested on a guide trip every day.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to take food out of people's mouth. I understand. I grew up here. I love to eat fish. Trout tacos are some of my favorite thing in the world. Yeah. But I want my grandkids to be able to, catch a couple fish to be able to eat. And if you got to start at some point with conservation, because it's harder to bring it back than it is just to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. And I think for the listeners here in North Carolina that, we struggle, we still have gill nets, and our commercial fishing harvest just destroys our trout population. It destroys our flounder population. It destroys our redfish population. And not just the gill nets either. The nearshore trawlers are devastating our waters as well, killing, juvenile gray trout and flounder, and croaker and spot, and a lot of these fish that a lot of the guys that come out and just fish on the pier, and they're trying to catch a couple fish to take home for dinner, spots and croakers and whatnot, and they can't, because the trawlers have killed all the babies, and they're wondering why there's no full size fish anymore. But what I really like about what you're saying is it inspires me, because getting gill nets out of the water is just the first step here. Getting trawlers pushed out to 5 miles is just the first step here. It's like we need to keep pushing for conservation, and like you're saying, and this is what I always share too, is like the fish don't have a voice for themselves. Like most other things are going to have people speak out because it's a little more direct, but it's so easy to take from a resource that you can't see. Like underwater, you're like, oh yeah, the redfish population's fine. I caught 30 of them yesterday. It's so hard without studies to really know where we're at, but just continually pushing for more conservation is my opinion, and I'm definitely radical. And I'd say you're probably radical on the side of conservation as well, but I think we got to be. We're so far gone. Like the normal is like what we think is good. It was poor back when the fish levels were where the fish stocks were where they should have been. So that's my kind of rambling on conservation. But gill nets are just the start. Like I like that guide law that you're thinking about. So if say it's like a guide with that takes out 5 clients. They can keep 5 per person and the guide's limit as well.
Yeah.
Do you see that a lot, like in pictures down there from like bait fishing guides and stuff like that, where they're killing 30 fish a day and stuff? Yeah,
no, I mean you see it a lot, and we do have a very strong bait fishery. Our sight fishing is a different story, but that has a lot to do with pressure, but also tides. But yeah, you see it a lot. Dead fish on dock picks are very popular, and I'm not putting down any guide out there doing it to make money. We have to do our thing, and when you can go out there and do it every day, why not keep doing it? Because it's working, and you can argue it from a lot of different angles. But do I think that those guys would be upset if there was a law preventing them from keeping half of those fish? I don't think they would. There's some old guys. My stepdad's a perfect example. The first time I mentioned want to lower the creel limit, he just kind of scoffed at me, because he's born and raised here. He literally lives on the same river he grew up on, and he's been fishing it for redfish his entire life. And his favorite redfish is a redfish out of the surf that is illegal now, but it was legal when he was a kid to be able to catch a 26-inch redfish out of the surf. That's his favorite redfish. He just can't do it anymore. So. Yeah. You get that old mentality of those guys that don't want to change. Those are the guys that show up at the board meetings about change to prove their point.
Right.
And so you see it in voting and in every aspect of life. But, I definitely don't want to claim that I'm the first person to try to come in and do something, and I'm not the one. I don't know all the exact science behind it, but, I've grown up here long enough, and I've been here long enough, and seen the fishing long enough to know that we could use some change. We're not in dire need of it at the moment, but there will be a time. So if we can get our foot in the door now, we can just make it last better longer.
Yeah, 100%, man. That's super cool. What is your slot down there for redfish?
Off the top of my head, I think it's 13 to 23.
13 to 23.
I could be off. Yeah, I think I could be off by an inch or two, but like I said, I don't really keep redfish to pay attention to much.
Right.
An 18-inch redfish is quite delicious to eat. And our trout limit is much larger. I think it's 15 trout above 14 inches. Like I said, I don't know the exact science behind this because I'm not a bait fisherman. I'm not a full-time guide, but yeah, they're pretty large numbers, especially when you compare. South Carolina just dropped their creel limit to 2 redfish. Florida's got 2 to 1 redfish throughout the state, and we have one of the smallest coasts in the southeast, and we're still harvesting a lot of redfish. So we're either claiming that we don't care about the numbers, or that we have the best red fishery in the world. And our red fishery is great, but it's I think a little bit more ignorance is bliss than anything right now.
Yeah, for sure. It's tough, man. Like, we're allowed one. I can't imagine killing, like, on a bait trip, taking clients out and catching a couple limits of trout and then a limit or 2 of red. I mean, you're cleaning 100 fish by the time it's over with. And
well, you can clean a school you have 4 clients in your boat on a bait trip. I mean, you can clean a school of fish out.
Definitely.
100%. to where they'll never be there again.
Yeah, that's scary. The same thing that we see with the gill nets here. It's like, I'll have a nice school of redfish in a bay, go back, and they're freaking gone, and there's some dead ones floating around with gill net scars that are too small, and that's just one guy gets to take the whole herd. Gets to take the whole herd of buffalo, and no one else gets to enjoy them or benefit from them. So, well, enough about the depressing conservation, because we both have a voice in one herd in that. But let's talk a little bit about kind of a switch around. Like, I think more than anywhere that I've ever been to fish, Savannah is one of the coolest destinations to hang out in when you're off the water. So let's talk a little bit about the town of Savannah and what you can do around there a little bit, and just why it is such a cool place to come. Maybe with, like, for me and my wife, we went down there. We were going to try to fish, but it was blowing. I was going to try to fish with you. It blew like 30, I think, that day. But we got to hang out around town, tons of cool bars and stuff and shops and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. We were talking before the show. One of the things I really liked about my hometown, Savannah, was one of the things that really drew me to Missoula was that it's not necessarily, the place to go red fishing or the place to go trout fishing like Missoula in the state of Montana, or red fishing in the southeast. If you want to go catch big redfish, you go to Louisiana. Everybody knows that.
Right.
But is there really anything to do in Hopedale other than catch redfish? No. Is there anything to do in Ennis, Montana, besides catch big browns? No. So you go to places like either Bozeman or Missoula or Savannah or Charleston because you want to experience, the culture of the town as well as fishing a cool fishery. And, what's cool about Savannah is it's an old town. It's got old city streets. It's still off the beaten path for most people. We don't have a big direct airport or anything like that. It's still easy to get to as far as driving. It's right off 95. But the food scene here is wonderful. People always say it's about 10 years behind Charleston, which is great because I don't think it's anything like Charleston. It's not as busy and crowded. Yeah. We don't have quite the fancy food scene, but we have a pretty insanely delicious food scene that I'm a pretty big fan of myself. I've always said everything in moderation except for fishing and eating. But yeah, I mean, it's a great place to come visit. It's cheap. The people are phenomenal. People ask me constantly how I was able to leave Montana, and you get out on the boat early sunrise morning and get to watch that sunrise over the ocean. It's just a different kind of beautiful. And then as far as our fishery, it's a difficult fishery. We have very big tides compared to most places in the southeast on the coast. On a big tide swing, we can have up to 9-10 foot tides sometimes. And it just means the fish have to move around a lot. So as far as sight fishing, you have short windows. You can fish throughout the tide most of the time, but can you fish throughout the tide with the weather? That's where you have to just have so many boxes check off to have a successful day. So it makes it a little bit more technical. We do have flood tides, which is, I think, really what everyone is targeting. Even people that come fish from Louisiana who've caught, multiple big bull reds on top water all day, still haven't had a chance to come fish in the grass, where you literally, before the tide gets up there, it looks like somebody's front yard, and then all of a sudden it just starts filling it with water, and you see these crawling around on their backs out of the water, tails flopping upside down. You get sometimes that are a little spooky, but when the fishing's really good and you get fish literally doing headstands, their tails are flopping in and out of the water, and you just hear massive eats, and you can have a 18-inch fish sound like a 3-foot fish in the marsh just because they're so aggressive when they're eating in the grass.
Yeah.
And then, but you have such a short window to get up there, have that hour to 2 hours before high. You have your slack, which they usually sit pretty still, just not really moving without the current. They love the current.
Yeah.
And then outgoing, you can kind of catch them coming off the flats in the outgoing. But it can be a fun, wild ride, and it's one of those things, as soon as you get up on the bow, game's on. There's no BS or chit chat. It's
right.
We're watching fish, you cat, and then we can catch up on the way back to the boat ramp.
Yeah, no joking right now. Shut your mouth, catch that fish.
Yeah, yeah.
Stop. Really, see him tailing. Don't look away from him. Keep your eyes on that tail. Don't lose that fish. Think about how you're about to catch him. I say that all the time.
I had my buddies from Southern Culture on the Fly out in October, and we're fishing some super early morning flood tides where they're here, and we got to the day before. David missed a couple shots of fish, and they were being a little spooky, so we didn't get one, and he hadn't had a good tailing redfish session in a long time. And that next morning, we got up there at dark in the morning, pulled up to the flat, and he had offered for Steve to get up there, and we were like, nope, Dave, you need to get your stuff together, get up on the platform. We're going to make this count. And sure as it worked out, he hooked up pretty quickly. But you just get these great moments where you can literally catch a fish in 8 inches of water in the grass before the sun rises.
Right. Yeah, it's so awesome. And it's literally so beautiful in totally different ways. I'm with you. Like, you think about, how do we leave Montana? But it's like, I think guys like you and I, we've got to experience a little bit of everything. We've got to, and you want to live in each area, like each fishery. Like, I don't want to just go fish each fishery. Like, I want to spend time and learn it and really get to know it and be immersed in, that culture and that, that fishery and that species. And I think that's like Savannah. When people ask me if you could go back and like plant yourself somewhere to be a fishing guide, which is a question I feel like I get kind of often. Like, if you could go back, would you still be in Wilmington, or would you be somewhere else? I always say Georgia. Like, I just think Georgia is such a cool, kind of a little, like you said, there's not many guides down there. It's a little more unexplored as far as the sight fishing goes, and maybe I'm crazy, but I just really like Georgia. And you're right there close to Florida. But let's talk a little bit about the low tide fishing. So here, it's a lot of times in our coastal river, the Cape Fear, one of our coastal rivers, the one that I spend a lot of my summer in. It's a lot like there, where you've got big tides. They're not that big, but the water's a little muddy. You got a lot of moving water, a lot of pluff mud, and so that sight fishing is really sick, but it's a short window. So usually it's like, for me, the 2 hours before and the 2 hours after low tide, and then again when it gets up in the grass, and then depending on where you are, you can delay the tide a little bit, and you just need those shallower banks, but you need that. Along the edge of the bank, you need that foot of water or less, like something real shallow where you can see. You're not going to see fish in 3 feet of water. Is that kind of what you're looking for down there?
Yeah, same thing. We just have bigger tides, so shorter window. We have, pretty good winter low tide fishing. That's when our water clears up really good, and you just get these beautiful days, with just super crisp, clear southeastern coastal water. It's still not blue like down in the Keys, but yeah, I mean, we're low tide fishing. You're looking for big bays, kind of inlets, cuts, anywhere where you have big sandbars that come out that can be protected. You're looking for some kind of structure on them, shorter, shallower grass, oyster rakes, stuff like that, where you can find where these fish, as the tide comes in, they can kind of move in as the water fills up, and they're always running from predators.
Right.
So they're trying to stay out of it. So if you can find structure for them to be able to tuck up next to as the tide comes in, That's usually a good sign. We don't have great sight fishing creeks here just because our tides are so big. A lot of our creeks are just really deep. And I'm speaking primarily in Savannah where I fish. The coast is still 90 miles long, and there's plenty of guys down south of me that fish a little differently or the same and have different fishing. But as far as Savannah and the kind of the areas I fish is, we're looking for, big sandbars, mud flats. In the wintertime and the summertime, we actually still have really good low tide fishing. It's just, like you said, muddier. It's trying to pick your battle on what the wind's doing for the mud that day, the incoming tide, outgoing tide, typically your last hour or two of outgoing before dead low, before incoming, or your cleanest water, to be able to find those fish. But yeah, you're looking for that about a foot and a half of water to be able to see those fish, still be able to push around, make noise. And then if you're fishing anything deeper than that, you're just really just blind casting.
Yeah.
And just giving yourself a bigger disadvantage.
How's the shallow water shark fishing there? I know in South Carolina you get a lot of bonnet heads and other sharks like that. Do you have some of that to play around with to kind of piece together a day?
Yeah, there are some you can find some low tide fish or mid tide fish like coming in and out of the grass. It was last weekend I had a client. We were messing around with some little 2-3 foot bonnet heads that were kind of on the mid tide on a little grass shelf. They're a little more they're more playful than aggressive. They'll kind of chase the fly. You'll hook one out of every couple. But you're really playing the game of, if you're fishing, do you want to hook into one, risking breaking it off, knowing that you might run into a redfish right after that and then not have a fly on.
Right.
So I'll tell a customer that situation. I'm like, if you want to mess with them. But we're looking for redfish. So, as far as shark trips, it's more fun just to go out behind a shrimp boat. Yeah. And just throw some flashy streamers and just hold on till you can't anymore and straighten it out and break it off.
Exactly. Yeah, sharks. You got to be either willing to just break them off or ready to fight your butt off on a fly rod for a big shark, especially in deep water. Man, holy crap, they can pull like crazy. That's kind of a similar scenario too with the sharks. The same thing with Louisiana is like when on a good day down there, you're like, don't throw at the little redfish. No, he's 15 pounds. Don't throw at him. Don't throw at him. Wait, hold tight. Because every time you hook a small fish, it's like that's when the big redfish floats up off the bow. You got a 30-pounder, and it's. I'm so bad about it, man. Like I throw at everything. I talk a big game. Like when I'm guiding, I'm like, no, don't throw at the little one. But when I'm up there, I'm like throwing at every little thing that moves. And
I'll cast at any fish I see.
Yeah, same here. I'm the same way. I think it's all fun. It's all. I mean, if you really like fly fishing, it's all about the visual. I think it's about the eat, man. Anything that you're tricking into eating your fly, you're watching it eat it. It's cool. I mean, obviously, if there's a 30-pound redfish coming down the bank and there's a 5-pound redfish coming down the bank, I'm going to throw a 30-pounder. But both bites are going to be cool. Both fish, fights are going to be fun and getting them to the boat. It's really when you're playing for a big fish, it's all about the picture. I feel like not always, but I mean, it becomes a little bit more about wanting a good picture, but I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
And sometimes that 5-pound redfish is going to eat 10 times more aggressively than that 30-pound redfish. So those smaller guys can, our average fish is 5 to 8 pounds. I would say on a good flood tide, on an average fish, people ask me that all the time. It's really hard to say, just because it's not like most fishing where you have big numbers to have big and very obvious averages. When we're out fishing a flood tide, I was listening to Captain Scott Owens, who's down in St. Simons. He did a podcast not too long ago talking about how, about the sustainability of our fishery. And, he's been guiding in this region with a couple other guides for a long time. And, they used to go out on low tides and even flood tides and catch 7 to 20 fish. And that was a phenomenal day. Nowadays, getting a client in a short flood tide window on 3 or 4 fish is, something to write home about.
Right.
It's one of those things you just kind of take it as it is. And, those average size fish, I would say, are between like 22 and 26, pretty average.
That's a lot like our fish.
Yeah, 28-inch plus 28-inch plus redfish in the grass is great. Anything below 22 is kind of meh, but still a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Low tide, I would say the average I would say on low tide, the average is a little harder to say just because schools of redfish are so diverse in their size.
Yeah.
that you can have a school with 18-inch fish and 30-inch fish in it. So
Yeah.
I would say honestly, you're going to catch a little bit bigger fish on the flats than low tide typically.
Oh, cool.
But you can also find massive, schools of big redfish too, in low tide.
Can you do you stumble into some of the 30-pound fish and stuff down there sometimes? Like, will that happen in the shallow water? Not really.
I will say, I don't, but I'm still a young guide.
Yeah.
I haven't been fishing this area like I'm fishing it in a long time. You can still stumble into them. I mean, we still have big bull reds and fishing, cut bait, mullet and stuff. In the fall, we have massive bull reds that come down here.
Yeah.
There are guides who I won't even name their names on this, that I know how to find them, with fly. And, but I think it's a perfect storm kind of deal. And, I'd never once try to ask them how they do it, because that's something they've curated over time. But, it's not something I think anyway, if it happens, it's definitely off the radar, but so are most things that happen in our fishery off the radar. No. Yeah. People are pretty protective.
You got to, even if you don't know the secret, you got to be stoked that there's still some secrets out there with the way fishing is nowadays.
Yeah.
So I know tons of secrets, 6 secrets everyone would want to know, but I just can't share them. So I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, it's like that keeps me up at night sometimes. Though I'm like, or you hear that somebody has been catching tarpon, inshore. Or you hear somebody's been catching, big bull redfish, sight fishing. I'm like, what the hell are they doing? Like, I gotta figure that out. But that's good. I mean, that pushes you to become a better angler. It keeps the wheels turning, keeps you from just getting in a rut. That challenge and that fire to become better is very important as a guide and an angler. So
yeah, and I think it's what makes. You can be a redfish guide forever, and there's nothing wrong with that, or you can be a trout guide forever, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think being able to push those limits and finding what else you can target, and whether it's, cobia or, knowing whenever the weather is going to be really bad, you can go find somewhere to, like you do, go, take your skip up the river and look for striper. And, anybody can guide when the fishing is good. It's you really stand out whenever you've got to shoot from the hook.
Yeah, it makes you or it breaks you sometimes. The days that it makes you, when you roll the dice, let's go try this, and it pays off. It's like, makes you feel good, and you're like, it really was just luck for the most part, but
I'd rather be lucky than good.
Me too, man. Me too. That's cool. Well, there was one other topic that we were discussing. We want to talk about. Can you remember what it was?
Kind of what to look for.
Yeah,
as
that's
far as like how we're fishing down here.
Yeah, that's right.
So, guiding and running the shop can be a little contradicting upon themselves as far as fishing is concerned, because as a guide, you don't necessarily want to give up your tactics and your secrets, but running a shop, you have a lot of people that come in and they want to learn how to fish this fishery, and being that fly fishing is growing continuously, especially in this area, we get a lot of people that come in every week, especially in the summertime, every weekend. They're either here to visit, they're just moving here, whether it's military, we have a strong military presence, anything like that, and they want to know how to catch redfish. And, a lot of places that you want to go fishing, you just go buy a rod, spinning rod, whatever you want to buy, and you can go to the beach, cast around for a little bit, or go to a dock or whatever, and you can go catch something, or try to. With our big tides here and our technical fishing, it's just not that easy. So I get a lot of people that come in and they want to go, where can I go wade? And, when you're up in Charleston, or even, not even that far north in Beaufort, since they don't have as many big tides, they have, maybe that's not it, that's my theory, but they have a lot more walkable flats than we do.
Gotcha.
A lot of our flats are out on, first off, Georgia has more undeveloped barrier islands than pretty much anywhere on the East Coast. So a lot of our flats aren't really accessible by foot only. You have to have a boat or a kayak or paddleboard, and most of them you have to have a boat. You can't even get to some of them just because you have to cross big sounds to get to. So it's a hard place to go fish, and it's hard sometimes to tell someone in the shop that, if you go to the beach and walk down with a fly rod in your hand, you're definitely not going to catch anything, because you're probably not. So without telling them that they need to book a guide, which is really your best chance of catching a fish. And it's kind of hard for someone to be able to come here and just go randomly catch redfish. It's especially on a fly rod. But things to look for, especially on flats, what I've realized, you want to, you can go look at any marsh grass, and at a high tide, they all kind of look good. But, one thing you're looking for is more of a hard bottom, because first off, you're wade fishing. You need something to be able to walk on that's not going to sink you up to your butt. Because pluff mud is what, like, my reality of what quicksand was as a child.
Yeah, exactly.
Never have we ever run across actual quicksand as adults, but as a child, you're made to believe that it's everywhere. I think bluff mud is quicksand.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I mean, the more you jiggle in it, the more you sink in it, and knowing that you're never going to sink above your head in it, there's times where you'll get desperate. And you're like, man, it'll kick your butt.
For sure, and you come out exhausted.
You come out exhausted, but using Google Maps I stare at Google Maps more than I stare at weather apps, which is, my fiance always asks me what the weather's doing because she knows I'm always looking at the weather.
Yeah, that's how my wife is.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. She's like, well, you've looked at the weather app 3 times a day already, and it's 6 a.m. So, with a flood tide especially, and what to look for is you're looking for shorter grass that's anywhere between, like, I would say 6 inches to a foot tall. It's a little bit more spread out. Finding an area with maybe a higher part on the marsh where it's like a shelly or rake or a little hammock or something like that. Typically, you find a flat around it like that. It's very similar to what you guys fish.
Yeah.
It's very similar. The only thing that doesn't really look like it is Louisiana, but that's just because everything looks like a low tide flat in Louisiana because there's no tide.
Right.
No tides. But yeah, looking for that short grass. The biggest thing I've found, especially here, and I believe it's everywhere, if you have a big, beautiful flat, doesn't matter how gorgeous it is, if there's no kind of escape route for the redfish, no way for them to quickly get on and off of it, whether it's a little feeder creek or whatnot, you're typically not going to find them on these flats. Just like how dolphin, you'll rarely ever run into one because they're smart enough to know when you're coming. Right. Redfish know when the water is coming in and off these flats, so you're never going to find a redfish that's dried up.
Yeah.
They know exactly how to get on and off the flats. So if you can find these feeder creeks, you can look at it in Google Maps, and Google Maps shows you what most of these flats will look like pretty closely. But finding creeks and flats that have kind of access really from both ends really helps because this fish can come on and off pretty easily. They're hard sandy bottoms are really helpful, but there's plenty of spots I catch redfish tailing in flood that you could never even weight them.
Right.
They'll kind of go wherever there's bait and fiddler crabs and shrimp, and they're already starting to show up in the grass down here. They're not hardcore tailing yet. We've seen quite a few tailing, but not the numbers and the consistency. Right now, it's more of a tail here and there, and then they'll kind of chill out, or they just get on the flats and kind of sit still for a little bit. We're not in our full tailing season, even though we've had tailing tides already this year.
Yep.
It's pretty common, but our real true tailing season doesn't start for another month or so, when the weather gets a little bit better and the temperature and stuff like that. We typically need on average, a 7.5 foot tide to flood consistently to get enough water in the grass. If you get a shorter one, you can still find fish in the grass, but having a full tide to be able to fish them is just harder. You have a shorter window. The higher the tide, you have a bigger window. Once it gets above an 8 to an 8.5, a lot of flats just get too much water. And as you know, when you get too much water in those flats, these fish just don't tail because it's too deep for them.
Right. They're probably tailing, but the tail's not out of the water. Yeah.
Yeah. If you see a fish tailing in 3 feet of water, think how big that fish is.
Yeah. That's the one.
Yeah, that's the one you're probably not going to catch. But and the real important thing is, I've read, I've seen, I've heard, I don't know what the exact science is, but supposedly, I think it's only like a small percentage of the population of redfish are actually kind of have it in their head to actually tail.
Yeah.
So I always try to preach to people, if you're going to eat redfish, eat them out of a school of redfish. Take 1 or 2 out of a school. You go onto a flat and you see the 3 redfish and you keep all 3 of those redfish. Those might be the only 3 redfish that are tailing on that flat for months.
Yeah.
putting those fish back, 'cause that's a very special fish. And also, when you get up on those flats, it's not like trout fishing where you're casting at a bank or streamer fishing for stripers or smallmouth or anything like that. Like, it is as close to upland bird hunting or archery as you can get. You're looking for that one fish to cast to. You sometimes have literally one shot at it before it gets in too thick a grass or swims into the boat. So it's a very rewarding fish. So by the time you catch it, you want to let it go because you're like, man, that was awesome, and I hope I see you again later.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's what more people need is interactions with fish in that way. When you sit there and you're just, soaking bait in 15 feet of water, not that there's anything wrong with it, you have way less connection to that fish. But when you have a cool encounter like that in the grass, a tailing fish, it's way more personal. It's way more intimate. And that's what I think drives that passion for conservation. I don't think it's a coincidence that sight fishermen and fly anglers are usually more conservation minded than the guys that are bait fishing on a dock. There's nothing wrong with either one of them, but one is a lot more invested and interactive with the fish than the other. And I think that's what gives you that respect and that desire to see that fish succeed,
Yeah, and on that same note, I don't want anyone to take away from this that we think that bait fishermen don't respect the fishery.
Right.
Plenty of them that do, and I literally fish with bait as well.
I do too, all the time.
I keep trout. I do it on a personal level, and I have a lot of fun with it. It's a lot of fun to go soak bait sometimes.
Yeah,
I don't want to put that much effort into it.
It's a blast.
But it's the same guys that live for duck season. We live for flood tide season. We live for redfish. A good buddy of mine, when I was starting to think about leaving Montana to come back here and guide, had mentioned, he made a comment that redfish ruin lives, and they're just such a underdog fish. They've been beat up their entire history. They've been taken advantage of, but they're tough. You get them in the boat, they have these eyes. You can drop them. They're just a tough fish. And
yeah, they're hardy.
You gotta let them go. You think they're worn out, and you got to let them go to revive them. And before you can get them in the water, they kick out of your hand, and they're a mile away from you in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
They've had dolphin and anglers and gill nets and commercial fishermen, everything after them, and they're resilient. You'll get them with half their, I've caught them before and had people catch them where their eyes are missing, they're half eaten, they're missing part of their tail, and they're still just strong and nasty and mean and beautiful all in the same.
I have a buddy that caught one with a broken off the metal 3-pronged piece of the gig broken off in its back, and it ate a fly.
Crazy.
It's crazy. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
So they
hungry,
are hungry.
hungry.
Hungry's hungry, man. I don't care if I got something hanging on my back. If I'm hungry, I'm eating.
Yeah.
Well, sweet, man. Well, that was an awesome podcast, and it's got me fired up. I'm like, all right, I'm coming down there. We're gonna film some flood tide fishing in Savannah this summer. I'm gonna do a little trip down there. As long as the world doesn't end before then, we'll have to put it together.
Yeah, man. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. It's well, I say that this summer. I'm about to have a baby. We'll see what happens. We'll see how flexible my schedule gets. So
I'll see you in 5 years.
Yeah, I'll see you in 5 years on Skype again.
Yeah.
But well, sweet, man. Is there anything else? Obviously, I'm going to connect all your social platforms and your contact stuff through, not your number and all that, but how to get up with you if people want to book a trip through your website and your Instagram on the show notes. But is there anything else you want to leave anybody with or anything like that?
Yeah, no, just don't forget to support your guides right now. There's a lot of stuff going on. A lot of people that rely on this time of year. I'm fortunate that I also have another job working in a shop. But a lot of guys work full time and are having a hard time finding work right now. I've had cancellations, but they don't hurt me like they hurt some people. But yeah, call to book a trip. I'm definitely not the only guy down here. I have plenty of other guys to recommend, and there's plenty of other guys that have been doing this longer than me. Want to make sure that they all get their credit. But other than that, just respect the fish and respect each other.
Yeah, I like it. That's a good one. Respect the fish and respect each other. Well, cool, man. Well, I'm going to close her out here, and we'll go from there. Let me switch over. Well, guys, thanks for tuning in. What a great show. If you haven't been to Savannah, even not even on a fishing level, it's just such an incredible place. So much cool history and beautiful buildings down there, beautiful trees, so much Spanish moss. It's a really cool spot to go hang out. Great spot to take your wife or your girlfriend or something and slip away for a day of fishing. Like he said, Chad's an incredible guide. There's a lot of, if fly fishing and sight fishing isn't your thing, if you want to change it up, there's a lot of other great guides on there as well. But definitely check him out. And if you're in the area, go check out Rivers and Glen Fly Shop. There's one in Augusta and there's one there in Savannah. Really cool shops. And you'll like it. You might even get to meet Chad's golden retrievers. So, I'm going to close it out here. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see y'all in the next episode. Later.